crystal shattered against polished marble, slicing through the smooth jazz of the engagement gala. Hundreds of New York's most dangerous elites fell dead silent. In the center of the ballroom stood Vivian, diamonds dripping from her neck, a leather riding crop raised high above Clara, the plus-sized maid trembling on the floor. Before the leather could strike flesh a second time, heavy footsteps echoed from the grand staircase. Lorenzo Moretti had arrived, and the look in his dark eyes promised absolute ruin. The Moretti estate sat like a fortified fortress on the cliffs of Montauk, a sprawling compound of glass, steel, and imported Italian marble that screamed of unimaginable wealth and unspoken danger. It was a gilded call for the elite, but for Clara Jenkins, it was simply a place of exhausting, relentless labor. Clara was 24 years old, and she existed entirely outside the aesthetic perimeter of the high society world she served. She was undeniably fat, possessing a large, soft frame with heavy curves and thick thighs that made the standard-issue staff uniform an instrument of daily torture. The stiff black polyester of her dress pinched sharply at her wide waist, and the white apron tied around her middle only accentuated the broadness of her hips. While the other maids flitted through the mansion's vast corridors like slender, invisible ghosts, Clara took up space. Her footsteps were heavier, her presence undeniable, a fact that seemed to deeply offend the future lady of the house. That lady was Vivian Kensington. Born into old New York money, Vivian was a creature of sharp angles, calculating blue eyes, and ruthless ambition. She was thin to the point of fragility, wearing her starvation as a badge of honor among her wealthy peers. Her upcoming marriage to Lorenzo Moretti, the undisputed head of the most powerful crime syndicate on the East Coast, was the merger of the decade. It combined Vivian's pristine political pedigree with Lorenzo's terrifying underground empire. Vivian despised Clara. To Vivian, Clara was an eyesore, a blemish on the perfectly curated aesthetic of the Moretti household. "You're sweating, Clara." Vivian's icy voice cut through the humid air of the industrial kitchen. Clara froze, her hands gripping a silver polishing cloth. She turned slowly, her heart sinking as Vivian clicked into the room on 5-inch Louboutins, followed closely by her entourage of wedding planners. "I apologize, Miss Kensington," Clara murmured, keeping her eyes glued to the spotless floor. It was unseasonably warm for late September, and Clara had spent the last 6 hours hauling crates of imported crystal stemware up from the cellar. Her round face was flushed red, and damp strands of brown hair clung to her forehead. Vivian circled her slowly, her eyes raking over Clara's full figure with undisguised disgust. "It's unsightly. Tomorrow is the engagement gala. Half the state's political infrastructure will be in this house, along with Lorenzo's associates. Senator Richard Hawley will be here. Arthur Pendleton, of the Pendleton Banking Group, is flying in from London. I will not have my guests losing their appetites because a fat, heavy-breathing maid is waddling around the champagne fountain." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat, her thick fingers twisting the polishing cloth. "I'll stay out of sight, Miss Kensington. I'm scheduled for kitchen duty tomorrow evening." "See that you do," Vivian sneered, stepping back as if Clara's size was somehow contagious. "Honestly, I don't know why Lorenzo hasn't fired you. You barely fit through the pantry doors. It's a miracle you haven't eaten the hors d'oeuvres." A few of the wedding planners suppressed cruel giggles. Clara bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted copper. She didn't work here for fun. She worked here because the pay was triple what she could make anywhere else, and every single dime went to a private residential care facility in New Jersey for her severely autistic younger brother. She would endure 1,000 Vivian Kensingtons to make sure Tommy had a safe place to sleep. "Yes, Miss Kensington," Clara whispered. "Disgusting," Vivian muttered under her breath, turning on her heel. "Make sure the lilies in the foyer are pristine, and for God's sake, Clara, put on some extra deodorant." As the kitchen doors swung shut, Clara let out a shaky breath, leaning her heavy frame against the stainless steel counter. She closed her eyes, trying to calm the sting of humiliation that radiated through her chest. She was used to being invisible, but being hyper-visible for all the wrong reasons was a unique kind of hell. She thought of Lorenzo Moretti, the boss. He was a phantom in his own home, a man of 32 who operated in shadows and hushed boardrooms. Clara had only seen him twice in her 6 months of employment. He was tall, powerfully built, with dark, stormy eyes and a jawline carved from granite. I was terrifying. The staff whispered that he had once dismantled a rival syndicate in Brooklyn without raising his voice, executing hostile takeovers with a brutal mathematical precision. Yet, unlike Vivian, Lorenzo had never once looked at Clara with disgust. In fact, on the rare occasion they crossed paths, he hadn't looked right through her either. He had simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her existence. But Lorenzo's passive neutrality would not save her from Vivian's active cruelty. Clara wiped the sweat from her brow, adjusted the tight collar of her dress, and went back to work. She just had to survive the engagement party. Just one night, and she could retreat back to the shadows. Little did she know, the shadows were about to be violently ripped away. By 8 o'clock the following evening, the Moretti estate had transformed into a blinding spectacle of wealth and power. The grand ballroom, with its vaulted ceilings and Renaissance-style frescoes, was bathed in the warm, golden glow of 3 massive crystal chandeliers. A 12-piece string quartet played in the corner, their delicate music weaving through the dense, heavy atmosphere of dangerous men and beautiful women. The guest list was a staggering collision of polite society and the criminal underworld. Clara, peering through the small circular window of the kitchen doors, recognized faces she had only ever seen on the evening news. There was Judge Henry Gable, sipping scotch and laughing with Dominic Romano, a man currently under federal investigation for racketeering. Over by the ice sculpture stood Donovan Reed, a notorious defense attorney, chatting amiably with the mayor of New York. It was a room where millions of dollars and countless lives were traded over champagne flutes. Clara was supposed to be in the back. That was the agreement. She had spent the first 2 hours of the gala happily hidden in the sweltering heat of the prep kitchen, washing endless stacks of fine china. But disaster struck at 8:30. Maria, one of the senior floor maids, suddenly collapsed from food poisoning, violently ill and unable to stand. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, was in a state of sheer panic. "Clara!" Mrs. Gable snapped, her face pale with stress. "Grab a tray. You need to take over Maria's route in the east wing of the ballroom. Now!" "But Mrs. Gable," Clara protested, her eyes wide with panic. "Miss Kensington explicitly forbade me from entering the ballroom. She said—" "I don't care what Miss Kensington said," the older woman hissed, shoving a heavy silver tray laden with crystal flutes of red vintage Cabernet into Clara's hands. "We are down a girl, and the Romano brothers are demanding service. If you don't get out there, Mr. Moretti will have my head, and I will personally see to it that you never work in this state again. Go." Trembling, Clara gripped the edges of the silver tray. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She smoothed down her apron over her wide stomach, instantly aware of how her thighs chafed against each other under the restrictive skirt as she walked. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the swinging doors and stepped into the blinding light of the gala. The sheer volume of the room hit her like a physical blow. The scent of expensive perfumes, roasted meats, and blooming orchids was suffocating. Clara kept her head down, trying to make her large body as small and unobtrusive as possible. She navigated the crowded floor with surprising grace for her size, sliding past groups of laughing socialites and hardened mobsters, offering up the blood-red wine with a quiet, polite murmur. For 20 minutes, she survived. She remained a ghost. And then she saw Vivian. Vivian Kensington was holding court near the center of the room, looking absolutely ethereal in a custom $200,000 ivory silk gown imported straight from Milan. It hugged her emaciated frame perfectly, dripping with thousands of hand-sewn pearls. She was surrounded by her elite friends, holding a glass of champagne, her head thrown back in a harsh, ringing laugh. Clara immediately altered her course, determined to give the bride-to-be a wide berth. She turned toward the grand staircase, carrying 6 full glasses of Cabernet on her tray. But Vivian was drunk on power, attention, and expensive champagne. She was animated, waving her hands as she told a story to Arthur Pendleton. "I told him," Vivian cackled, stepping backward into the aisle without looking. "If he thinks he can outbid my father, he's absolutely—" It happened in a fraction of a second. Vivian stepped blindly backward. Clara, weighed down by her heavy frame and unable to stop her momentum in time, collided squarely with Vivian's back. The impact knocked the breath out of both women. Clara gasped, desperately trying to balance the heavy silver tray, but her grip faltered. The tray tipped forward. Time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. Clara watched in absolute, paralyzing horror as 6 crystal flutes of dark, heavy Cabernet spilled forward, cascading through the air like a waterfall of fresh blood. The wine hit Vivian's back. It soaked instantly into the delicate, porous ivory silk of her custom gown, spreading rapidly like a violent, dark crimson stain across her shoulder blades, dripping down the perfectly tailored skirt and pooling onto the pristine white marble floor. The crash of the silver tray hitting the marble echoed like a gunshot. The crystal flutes shattered into 100 pieces. The string quartet squeaked to an abrupt halt. The dull roar of conversation died instantly. 500 of the most powerful people in the country turned their heads in unison to stare at the center of the room. Silence fell. Heavy, suffocating, absolute silence. Clara stood frozen, her hands trembling violently at her sides, her chest heaving as she stared at the ruined masterpiece of a dress. Vivian slowly turned around. The expression on Vivian's face wasn't just anger. It was a demonic, unhinged fury. Her blue eyes were wide, her perfectly painted lips trembling as she looked at the dark red wine dripping from her gown. Then her eyes locked onto Clara. "You," Vivian whispered, the sound carrying in the dead silent ballroom. "You fat, stupid, clumsy cow." Clara couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. The eyes of every Mafia boss, politician, and socialite were drilling into her skin, stripping her bare. "I'm so sorry," Clara choked out, tears instantly brimming in her eyes, spilling over her round cheeks. "Miss Kensington, I swear I didn't mean to. You stepped back and I couldn't stop. I'll pay for it. I'll clean it. I'm so sorry." "Clean it!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. She lunged forward, her diamond. Clad fingers grabbing a fistful of Clara's uniform collar. The sheer force of the smaller woman's rage forced Clara to stumble backward. "You stupid, grotesque sow! This dress is worth more than your miserable, pathetic life. I told you to stay out of my sight. You ruin everything you touch, you disgusting fat pig." The insults flew from Vivian's mouth like venom. Guests whispered, some shifting uncomfortably. But no one dared step forward. In this world, the elite handled their property and their staff, however they saw fit. "Get on your knees," Vivian hissed, her face mere inches from Clara's. "Please," Clara sobbed, looking around for help. But she only saw faces of stone. "I said get on your goddamn knees and wipe it up with your hands!" Vivian screamed, shoving Clara hard in the chest. Off balance and shaking, Clara's heavy legs gave out. She crashed to her knees on the hard marble, the shattered glass from the flutes biting through the thin fabric of her skirt, slicing into the flesh of her knees. She let out a pained whimper, reaching out with her bare, trembling hands to gather the soaked napkins from the floor. But seeing Clara on her knees wasn't enough for Vivian. The humiliation didn't soothe the burning rage of her ruined night. Vivian's frantic eyes darted around the room and landed on a display table just 10 feet away. It was a silent auction table, arranged for charity, featuring antique equestrian gear donated by a British lord. Lying on the velvet cloth was a 19th century leather riding crop, thick, black, and tipped with heavy brass. Vivian marched to the table, her ruined dress dragging heavily behind her. She snatched the leather crop from the velvet, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the handle. A murmur of genuine alarm rippled through the crowd. Donovan Reed took a half-step forward, but Dominic Romano put a heavy hand on the lawyer's chest, shaking his head. No one intervened in Moretti business. Vivian stormed back to where Clara was weeping on the floor, frantically trying to dab at the spilled wine with her bare, bleeding hands. "You want to act like a clumsy animal," Vivian snarled, raising the leather crop high into the air. "Then you'll be disciplined like one." Crack. The sound of the thick leather slicing through the air and colliding with flesh echoed through the cavernous ballroom like a thunderclap. The heavy crop struck Clara across the back of her thick shoulder. The agonizing, burning pain was immediate. Clara screamed, a raw, terrified sound, as the force of the blow knocked her forward, her hands slipping in the puddle of wine and blood. The cheap polyester of her uniform tore instantly, leaving a vicious, raised red welt across her skin. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Whipping a maid in front of high society was a level of barbaric cruelty that even the hardened mobsters found shocking. Clara curled into a tight ball, wrapping her thick arms over her head, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, please stop. I'm sorry. I'm going to flay the fat right off your back," Vivian screamed, utterly blinded by her own manic rage. She planted her feet, adjusting her grip on the brass handle, and hauled her arm back to deliver a second, devastating blow to Clara's exposed neck. "Drop it!" The voice was not a shout. It was not a scream. It was a low, gravelly baritone that barely rose above a conversational volume. But it possessed a localized, terrifying gravity that instantly paralyzed every single person in the room. The riding crop stopped mid-air. Vivian froze, her chest heaving, her eyes darting to the top of the grand marble staircase. There stood Lorenzo Moretti. I was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, his broad shoulders filling the tailored fabric. His hands were casually tucked into his pockets, but his dark, lethal eyes were fixed on Vivian. The air in the ballroom seemed to drop 20 degrees. No one breathed. The silence was so absolute that Clara's ragged, pathetic sobs were the only sound echoing off the walls. Slowly, methodically, Lorenzo descended the stairs. His leather shoes clicked against the marble with the slow, predatory rhythm. The crowd instinctively parted for him, stepping back in genuine terror as the Don of the Moretti family walked through the sea of his guests. Vivian lowered the crop, her arrogant facade cracking as she saw the murderous shadow passing over her fiancé's face. "Enzo," she gasped, her voice suddenly trembling. "Enzo, darling, she ruined my dress. This fat idiot ruined a $200,000 piece of art. I was just—" Lorenzo didn't even look at her. He didn't acknowledge her existence. He walked right past Vivian, the scent of his expensive cologne wafting over the spilled wine. He stopped in front of Clara, who was still curled in a ball on the glass-strewn floor, bleeding and weeping hysterically. Slowly, the ruthless Mafia boss dropped to one knee, ignoring the wine that soaked into his custom trousers. He reached out with large, scarred hands, his movements remarkably gentle. "Look at me," Lorenzo commanded softly. Clara flinched, expecting another strike, but slowly raised her tear-stained, flushed face to meet his gaze. Her large, soft body trembled violently under his hands. Lorenzo's dark eyes scanned her face, dropping to the bleeding cuts on her knees, and finally resting on the vicious, angry welt rising through the torn fabric on her shoulder. A muscle ticked violently in his jaw. Without a word, Lorenzo removed his dark suit jacket and draped it gently over Clara's broad, shaking shoulders, covering her wound and her humiliation. Then he stood up, offering his large hand to her. "Stand up, mia cara, my dear," he said quietly. Shocked out of her mind, Clara placed her thick, trembling hand in his. Lorenzo effortlessly pulled her heavy frame up from the floor, tucking her safely behind his massive body. Only then did Lorenzo Moretti turn his dark, dead eyes onto his fiancée. Vivian took a terrified step back, dropping the leather crop. It clattered loudly against the marble. "Enzo," Vivian whimpered, the realization of what she had just done finally crashing over her. She was clumsy. Lorenzo stepped forward, his presence suffocating the room. "You brought a whip," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, terrifying purr. "Down on a woman in my house. You struck someone under my protection." "She's just a fat maid," Vivian cried defensively, gesturing wildly. Lorenzo's hand shot out with the speed of a striking viper. He didn't hit her. He simply grabbed the massive 5-carat, flawless diamond engagement ring on Vivian's left hand, gripped her finger, and violently ripped the ring off. Vivian shrieked in pain as the metal scraped her knuckle. Lorenzo held the multi-million-dollar ring up to the light for a split second, then carelessly tossed it into the puddle of spilled wine and blood on the floor. "The wedding is off," Lorenzo stated, his voice echoing in the dead silence. "And if you are not off my property in exactly 3 minutes, Vivian, I will personally ensure your father's political career is buried right next to your body. Get out." The 3 minutes Lorenzo gave Vivian Kensington to vacate the premises felt like a suspended animation of pure, unadulterated terror. Vivian, stripped of her dignity and her 5-carat shield, scrambled backward like a frightened animal. Her father, Senator Arthur Kensington, pushed through the frozen crowd, his face purple with outrage. He tried to speak, to salvage the multi-million-dollar alliance, but a single, lethal glare from Lorenzo's capo, a towering man named Rocco, silenced the politician instantly. Within 90 seconds, the Kensingtons were gone, leaving a trail of ruined silk and shattered pride. Lorenzo did not watch them leave. His entire focus remained on the trembling woman tucked against his side. Clara was in shock. Her heavy body shook violently beneath the expensive wool of Lorenzo's suit jacket. The sharp sting of the whip mark on her shoulder throbbed in time with her racing heartbeat, and her knees bled sluggishly onto the pristine marble. "Leo," Lorenzo commanded, his voice slicing through the silent ballroom. A sharp-featured man in a black suit immediately stepped forward. "Yes, boss." "Clear the room. The party is over. If anyone complains, remind them who owns the ground they are standing on. Then, call Dr. Harrison from Mount Sinai. Tell him to get to my private suite in 10 minutes with a full medical kit. If he asks questions, tell him he won't have a tongue left to ask them with tomorrow." "Right away, boss." Lorenzo turned his attention back to Clara. "Can you walk, mia cara, or shall I carry you?" Clara's breath hitched. The idea of this terrifying, beautiful man trying to lift her immense weight was entirely too much for her fragile state of mind. I can walk, Mr. Moretti. Please, I'm so heavy, I can walk." A brief flash of something dark and protective crossed Lorenzo's stormy eyes. He didn't argue, but he didn't let her go either. He wrapped his thick, muscular arm firmly around her wide waist, pressing her soft, heavy curves against his hard side to support her weight. He led her away from the staring eyes of the underworld elite, bypassing the grand staircase and moving down a heavily guarded hallway to a private elevator hidden behind mahogany panels. The doors slid shut, cutting off the whispers of the crowd, leaving them in a heavy velvet silence. Clara stared at the floor, tears continuing to track down her round, flushed cheeks. She felt hideous. She was a fat, bleeding maid in a torn, cheap polyester uniform, standing next to a god of New York's criminal underworld. She took up too much space in the elevator. Her thick thighs brushed together awkwardly. She felt the overwhelming urge to apologize for her very existence. "I'm fired, aren't I?" Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "I'll pack my things tonight. I'm so sorry I ruined your engagement, Mr. Moretti. I know the alliance with Senator Kensington was important for the ports." Lorenzo hit the emergency stop button on the elevator. The machine jolted to a halt between floors. He turned to her, placing his large hands gently on her broad, soft shoulders. He was so close she could smell the rich scent of tobacco, bergamot, and danger clinging to his skin. "Look at me, Clara," he said, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips sent a shiver straight down her spine. She hesitantly raised her eyes. "You are not fired," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that demanded absolute belief. "And you did not ruin anything. I have been looking for an excuse to sever ties with the Kensington family for 3 months. Vivian is a cruel, vapid parasite. I only agreed to the arrangement because her father controlled the zoning boards for my new developments in Queens. But no zoning board is worth watching a woman be abused in my own home. Clara blinked, fresh tears welling. But I'm just a maid. I'm nobody. Why would you throw away millions for me? Lorenzo's thumb gently brushed away a tear on her full cheek. You are not a nobody, Clara Jenkins. You are a woman who works 70 hours a week, breaking her back to pay for a private room at the Oakwood Care Facility in New Jersey for her autistic brother, Tommy. You endure the cruelty of women like Vivian because you have a heart that is infinitely larger than their bank accounts. Clara gasped, stepping back, her wide body hitting the glass wall of the elevator. How do you know about Tommy? I am Lorenzo Moretti, he stated simply, unbothered by her shock. No one works in my home without my knowing every detail of their life. I know you skip meals so you can afford Tommy's specialized speech therapy. I know you sit in the back of the staff transport van because the other girls make fun of your size. I have watched you, Clara, and I have respected you far more than anyone in that ballroom tonight. Before Clara could process the earth-shattering revelation that the Mafia boss had been secretly watching and admiring her, he restarted the elevator. They arrived at the penthouse suite, a sprawling, dark wood sanctuary of masculine luxury that overlooked the crashing waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Dr. Harrison, a discreet private physician on the Moretti payroll, was already waiting. For the next hour, Clara was treated like spun glass. Dr. Harrison carefully removed the glass shards from her knees and applied a soothing, expensive burn salve to the angry red welt on her shoulder. When the doctor tried to cut away the torn, tight fabric of Clara's uniform to bandage her shoulder, Clara shrank back, deeply ashamed of her large stomach and the thick rolls of her back being exposed. Lorenzo noticed immediately. He dismissed the doctor with a sharp nod. Leave the bandages. I will finish it. Once they were alone, Lorenzo poured a glass of 200-year-old scotch and pressed it into her trembling hands. Then he picked up the medical gauze. Mr. Moretti, please, Clara whispered, clutching the front of her dress. You shouldn't. I'm not. My body is not meant to be looked at. I'm fat. It's unsightly. Lorenzo's jaw clenched so hard the bone looked ready to snap. He knelt in front of where she sat on his plush velvet sofa. Who told you that? Vivian? The other maids? Society. He reached out, his warm, rough hands gently pulling hers away from her chest. He unbuttoned the top of her ruined uniform, just enough to access her shoulder, his eyes never straying with disrespect, only burning with a fierce, possessive intensity. You have a body that has carried the weight of the world, Clara, Lorenzo murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he taped the pristine white gauze over the welt on her heavy shoulder. You are soft, you are full, and you are real. There is more warmth and beauty in 1 inch of your skin than in the entirety of Vivian Kensington's starved, hollow existence. Never, ever hide yourself from me. Clara sobbed, a deep, ugly, cathartic sound. For 24 years, she had been told she took up too much space. Now, the most dangerous man in New York was telling her that her space was a sanctuary. Tonight, you sleep in my bed, Lorenzo commanded gently, standing up. I will take the couch. Tomorrow, the rules of this house change forever. While Clara slept a deep, exhausted sleep wrapped in Lorenzo's silk sheets, a storm was brewing in the heart of Manhattan. Senator Arthur Kensington paced the length of his mahogany study in his Upper East Side townhouse, downing a glass of bourbon. Vivian sat on a leather armchair, weeping hysterically, the ruined $200,000 silk gown still clinging to her thin frame like a bloody shroud. "He humiliated me, Daddy!" Vivian shrieked, her face a mess of smeared mascara. "He tossed my ring on the floor for a fat, pathetic pig. You have to destroy him. You have to ruin his businesses." Senator Kensington slammed his glass onto the desk. "Quiet, Vivian. You think I don't know that? Moretti humiliated our entire family in front of the governor, the mayor, and half the Pendleton banking group. But Lorenzo Moretti, he isn't a man you just destroy. He commands an army of killers." From the shadows of the study stepped Arthur's brother, Victor Kensington. Victor was the black sheep of the old money family, a man who ran an illicit gambling and extortion ring that constantly bumped heads with the Moretti syndicate. "Arthur is right," Victor sneered, lighting a cigar. "You don't hit Lorenzo directly. He's too heavily guarded. If you want to teach a dog a lesson, you don't kick the dog. You take away its favorite toy." Vivian looked up, her blue eyes turning vicious. "The maid?" "Exactly," Victor purred. "I have contacts in Lorenzo's staff. I know everything about this Clara Jenkins. She's nobody, a piece of white trash collateral. But she has a vulnerability. An autistic brother in a facility in New Jersey, Oakwood." Senator Kensington's eyes widened, a sickening smile creeping over his face. "If something were to happen to the facility, or the boy, Lorenzo would look weak. It would send a message to the 5 families that defying the Kensington-Hawley political alliance comes with heavy casualties, and it will break that fat cow's heart." "Consider it done," Victor said, pulling out a burner phone. Back at the Moretti compound, dawn broke over the Atlantic, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Clara woke up in a bed the size of a small swimming pool, surrounded by pillows that smelled intoxicatingly like Lorenzo. For a brief, blissful second, she forgot the horror of the night before. Then the heavy oak doors to the suite opened. It was Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper. But the woman who usually barked orders and mocked Clara's weight was trembling so violently, the silver breakfast tray in her hands rattled loudly. Good morning, Miss Jenkins," Mrs. Gable stammered, keeping her eyes respectfully glued to the floor. "Mr. Moretti requested I bring you breakfast. Blueberry pancakes, bacon, eggs, and fresh fruit. Please, if it is not to your liking, I will have the chef make something else immediately." Clara sat up, pulling the thick down comforter over her large breasts. "Mrs. Gable, you don't have to serve me. I'm staff." "Not anymore, Clara," a deep voice rumbled. Lorenzo walked into the room, fresh from a shower, wearing a crisp white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar and dark trousers. He looked devastating. He dismissed Mrs. Gable with a wave of his hand. The housekeeper practically ran out of the room. "You are no longer an employee of this estate," Lorenzo said, sitting on the edge of the mattress. The bed dipped under his heavy, muscular weight. "You are my guest, and you will be treated with the utmost respect." Before Clara could protest, a knock echoed at the door. Rocco, the towering capo, entered carrying 5 massive garment bags bearing the logos of Christian Dior, Chanel, and custom Italian tailors. I had a team of designers working through the night, Lorenzo explained casually, as Rocco hung the bags on a rolling rack and swiftly exited. I noticed your uniform was always too tight. It restricted you. It was designed to make you feel small. These clothes were designed specifically for your measurements, Clara, to accentuate your curves, not hide them. Clara was speechless. She walked to the rack in the oversized t-shirt Lorenzo had given her the night before. She unzipped the first bag. It was a breathtaking, soft cashmere wrap dress in a deep burgundy, tailored flawlessly for a plus-sized frame. The fabrics were luxurious, yielding, designed to move with her heavy body, not confine it. Lorenzo, this is hundreds of thousands of dollars, Clara breathed, touching the silk lining. I can't accept this. You can, and you will, he said, stepping up behind her. His chest brushed against her back, and he looked at their reflection in the full-length mirror. Her wide, soft body, juxtaposed against his hard, lethal frame, looked incredibly right. Because tonight you are accompanying me to the Pierre Hotel. The Kensingtons are hosting their annual charity gala. We are going to make an appearance. Before Clara could process the sheer terror of facing Vivian again, Lorenzo's cell phone rang. It was a special encrypted ringtone. Lorenzo answered it. Speak. Clara watched as the color drained from the Mafia boss's face. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by an abyss of absolute, freezing death. The temperature in the room plummeted. Are my men on site? Lorenzo asked, his voice deathly quiet. Good. Lock the facility down. If a single hair on Tommy's head is touched, I will personally skin Victor Kensington alive. I'm on my way. Clara's heart stopped. Tommy? Lorenzo! What about Tommy? Lorenzo hung up the phone and grabbed his shoulder holster from a nearby chair. He strapped the heavy leather over his chest, his eyes burning with a violent fire. Victor Kensington sent a hit squad to the Oakwood facility, Lorenzo said, checking the magazine of his Glock. He thought he could use your brother to punish me. Clara screamed, her knees buckling. No, please, Tommy is innocent. He doesn't understand. Lorenzo caught her heavy frame before she hit the floor, hauling her flush against his chest. He gripped the back of her head, forcing her to look into his murderous eyes. Listen to me, Clara. Do you think I am a fool? The moment I threw Vivian out, I dispatched 12 of my deadliest men to Oakwood. Your brother is safe. The hit squad is currently bleeding out in the parking lot. Clara sobbed, burying her face into his chest, clutching his shirt with thick, desperate fingers. The relief was a physical weight crushing her. Thank you. Oh my God. Thank you. Lorenzo wrapped his arms around her wide waist, pressing his lips fiercely to the crown of her head. No one touches what is mine, Clara. No one. Now get dressed in the green silk gown. Tonight we do not just survive. Tonight we go to war. The Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue was a bastion of old-world Manhattan elegance. Its grand ballroom was a sea of crystal, white orchids, and generational wealth. Senator Arthur Kensington was on stage, delivering a smug speech about family values and political integrity, while Vivian stood beside him in a new, sparkling silver gown, attempting to play the role of the victimized, brave daughter. They thought they had won. They thought their hit on the Oakwood facility had put Lorenzo Moretti in his place. They were dead wrong. At precisely 9:30, the heavy, gold-leafed double doors of the Pierre ballroom were kicked violently open. The sound cracked like a cannon shot over the polite applause of the crowd. 50 of Lorenzo Moretti's most heavily armed, Terrifying enforcers flooded into the room. Wearing sharp black suits, they immediately locked down every exit, confiscated the cell phones of the private security guards, and stood like statues of death around the perimeter of the ballroom. Panic rippled through the elite crowd, but no one dared move. Then Lorenzo Moretti walked in. He moved with the lazy, terrifying grace of an apex predator that had cornered its prey. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo that cost more than most people made in a decade. But it wasn't Lorenzo that made the high society crowd gasp in absolute shock. It was the woman holding his arm. Clara walked beside the Mafia kingpin, and for the first time in her life, she did not look down. She was a vision of absolute, unapologetic power. She wore a custom Christian Dior gown of deep, luminous emerald green silk. The heavy fabric cascaded over her plus-sized frame perfectly, hugging her large breasts and cinching tightly at her wide waist before flaring out over her thick hips and heavy thighs. A slit up the side revealed smooth, pale skin and a pair of diamond-encrusted heels that Lorenzo had personally fastened to her feet. Around her thick neck rested a flawless diamond and emerald necklace, the Moretti family heirloom, worn only by the matriarch of the syndicate, with her brown hair swept up into an elegant, messy chignon. Clara looked like a Renaissance painting brought to life. She was robust, magnificent, and entirely out of Vivian Kensington's league. On the stage, Vivian let out a strangled, horrified gasp, her face draining of all color. Senator Kensington dropped his microphone. It squealed with loud, painful feedback. Lorenzo and Clara walked slowly down the center aisle, the sea of billionaires and politicians parting in sheer terror. "Lorenzo," Senator Kensington barked, attempting to project false bravado, though his hands shook violently. "You have no right to barge in here. This is a private charity event." Lorenzo stopped at the base of the stage. He didn't raise his voice, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, his words carried perfectly. "You sent armed men to a facility for mentally disabled children this morning, Arthur," Lorenzo stated softly. The collective gasp from the wealthy crowd was deafening. Even among corrupt politicians, harming children was a line rarely crossed. That's a lie," Senator Kensington stammered, looking around wildly. "I know nothing about that," Lorenzo snapped his fingers. From the back of the room, Rocco walked forward, dragging a bloodied, beaten man by the collar of his shirt. It was Victor Kensington. Rocco threw Victor onto the polished floor at the base of the stage. Victor groaned, coughing up blood onto the white marble. "Your brother has been very talkative for the last 3 hours," Lorenzo purred, his eyes locked on the senator. "He told me about the hit. He told me about your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He told me about the illegal lobbying money you funneled through Vivian's fake charities." Vivian screamed. "You're lying! Enzo, you're a monster!" "The only monster here, Vivian," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "is the woman who took a whip to a helpless maid, and the father who tried to murder an innocent autistic boy to protect his pride." Lorenzo pulled a thick manila envelope from inside his tuxedo jacket and tossed it onto the stage. It landed with a heavy thud at the senator's feet. "Those are the wire transfers, Arthur. The audio recordings of Victor ordering the hit. Bank statements. I have already sent copies to the FBI, the New York Times, and the Federal Election Commission." Lorenzo smiled, a cold, empty baring of teeth. "Your career is dead, Your family name is ruined. And if I ever see either of you in my city again, I will not use the FBI to handle it. I will handle it myself." Senator Kensington collapsed to his knees on the stage, clutching his chest as the reality of his total destruction set in. Vivian wailed, falling beside her father, her social empire turning to ash in a matter of seconds. Lorenzo didn't look at them again. The trash had been disposed of. He turned his attention entirely to Clara, who was trembling, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. The most powerful political family in the state had just been annihilated to avenge her. Right there, in front of the stunned, terrified elite of New York, Lorenzo Moretti stepped into Clara's personal space. He reached out with both hands, gently cupping her full, round cheeks. "Lorenzo?" Clara whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "They told you that you were nothing," Lorenzo murmured, his dark eyes burning with a raw, unprotected vulnerability he had never shown another living soul. "They tried to make you feel small because they were terrified of your size, because your heart, your strength, your resilience, it eclipses them all." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You are not a maid, Clara Jenkins. You are not a ghost. You are my queen. And tonight, New York bows to you." Without waiting for her response, Lorenzo Moretti, the ruthless don of the East Coast Syndicate, crushed his lips against hers. The kiss was explosive. It was an absolute claiming. Clara gasped, her thick arms instinctively wrapping around Lorenzo's broad neck as he pulled her heavy body flush against his chest. He kissed her with a desperate, consuming fire, his large hands sliding down her back to firmly grip her wide hips, proving to everyone in the room, and to Clara herself, that he worshipped every single curve she possessed. The room erupted into flashes of light as cell phone cameras clicked, capturing the moment the Mafia king claimed his plus-sized bride over the ruined bodies of New York's elite. The war with the Kensingtons was over. But in the dangerous, bloody world of the Italian Mafia, peace is never permanent. And as Clara melted into Lorenzo's embrace, oblivious to the cameras, a shadow detached itself from the back of the ballroom, slipping silently out the side door, dialing a number with an international country code. The real threat hadn't even begun. In the days following the catastrophic Pierre Hotel gala, the fallout was biblical. Lorenzo didn't just leave the Kensington family in ruins. He orchestrated a media massacre. He quietly retained Michael Citrick, the real-life, ruthlessly effective crisis PR manager from Los Angeles, who specialized in spinning billionaires out of scandals. Within 48 hours, Citrick's firm had strategically leaked every wire transfer and audio recording to the national press. Senator Arthur Kensington was indicted by federal prosecutors, and Vivian became a social pariah, fleeing to a disgraced exile in Switzerland. But inside the fortified walls of the Moretti compound, a different kind of intensity was brewing. Clara's life had transformed overnight. Lorenzo moved Tommy out of the Oakwood facility and into a privately funded, state-of-the-art wing at the renowned Cleveland Clinic, overseen directly by top-tier neurological specialists. The financial burden that had crushed Clara for years was erased with a single stroke of Lorenzo's black titanium Amex. In return, Lorenzo demanded only one thing: Clara's absolute surrender to her new reality. I was a man completely obsessed. Where society had taught Clara to shrink, Lorenzo demanded she take up space. He loved her fat, soft body with a feral, unapologetic hunger. In the dark hours of the night, wrapped in silk sheets, his large, scarred hands would map the thick curves of her waist, the heavy swell of her thighs, and the soft, rolling flesh of her stomach, as if she were a priceless Renaissance sculpture. "You are perfect," he would murmur against her collarbone, his voice rough with desire. "Never lose a single ounce. You belong to me, exactly as you are." But the Mafia's golden rule had been broken. Lorenzo had put a woman above the business. By severing the Kensington alliance, he had cost the international syndicates billions in port tariffs. 2 weeks after the gala, the consequences arrived in the dead of night. A torrential rainstorm battered the glass walls of the Montauk estate. Clara was in the master suite, wearing a custom, deep red silk nightgown that clung beautifully to her large breasts and wide hips. Lorenzo was across the room, pouring 2 glasses of Macallan, 1926, his shoulder holster discarded on the velvet armchair. Downstairs, the security alarms didn't even chime. The infiltrator was a ghost, a professional assassin sent by the Falcone family in Sicily, a man known only as Il Fantasma. The master bedroom door didn't burst open. It clicked with a sickening, silent precision. Lorenzo his Mafia instincts flaring a fraction of a second too late. The assassin, a wiry, dead-eyed man dressed entirely in tactical black, stepped out of the shadows. He held a suppressed Heckler & Koch Mk-23 pistol, aimed directly at Lorenzo's chest. "The commission sends its regards, Don Moretti," the assassin whispered in thick Italian. Lorenzo lunged toward his holster, but the assassin was faster. A suppressed thwip pierced the air, and a bullet tore through Lorenzo's bicep. The heavy caliber spun the massive Mafia boss around, dropping him to his knees against the mahogany wet bar. Blood instantly stained his white shirt. Clara screamed, the sound tearing her throat. The assassin didn't even look at her. To him, she was just collateral. A fat, screaming civilian. He stepped forward, casually raising the pistol to deliver the fatal execution shot to the back of Lorenzo's head. Time stopped for Clara. For 24 years, she had been told she was too big, too heavy, too clumsy. Her size was her greatest source of shame. But in that split second, watching the man who had treated her like a goddess about to be executed, her shame evaporated. It was replaced by a roaring, primal fury. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have martial arts training. But she had mass. With a ferocious roar, Clara pushed off the mattress. Her heavy, powerful legs pumped across the Persian rug. She didn't try to punch the assassin or disarm him. She threw her entire, substantial body weight directly into him. The wiry Sicilian assassin never saw it coming. The sheer, unstoppable kinetic energy of Clara's heavy frame slamming into his side hit him like a runaway freight train. They crashed violently into the reinforced glass balcony doors. The impact knocked the wind out of the killer, and the gun flew from his grip, skittering across the floorboards. But Clara didn't stop there. Using her thick thighs and broad chest, she pinned the struggling killer to the floor. He punched frantically at her ribs, trying to throw her off, but he was entirely outmatched by her size and gravitational weight. She was an immovable object, crushing his chest, suffocating his frantic attempts to escape. "Lorenzo! The gun!" Clara screamed, pressing her heavy forearm against the assassin's throat, ignoring the brutal punches raining down on her shoulder. Lorenzo, gasping through the pain of his shattered arm, grabbed the dropped MK-23 from the floor. He dragged himself up, his dark eyes blazing with a murderous, unholy fire. "Clara, move!" Lorenzo commanded. Clara rolled her heavy body off the assassin, scrambling backward. The killer gasped for air, trying to reach for a hidden boot knife. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger 3 times. The assassin's chest caved. He went entirely still. The room plunged into a deafening silence, save for the howling wind and Clara's ragged breathing. She sat on the floor, her soft stomach heaving, her thick arms trembling with pure adrenaline. She expected Lorenzo to call for his guards, to fly into a rage about the breach in security. Instead, Lorenzo dropped the gun and fell to his knees in front of her, ignoring his bleeding arm. He reached out, pulling her violently against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He was shaking. The invincible Don of New York was shaking. "You saved my life," Lorenzo breathed, pressing frantic kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her trembling lips. "You threw yourself at a trained killer. My brave, beautiful, fearless queen." "I was going to take you from me," Clara sobbed, wrapping her thick arms securely around his waist. "I couldn't let him. I'm heavy, Lorenzo. I knew I could crush him." Lorenzo pulled back, his dark eyes shining with an emotion so profound it bordered on religious reverence. He reached into his pocket with his uninjured hand, pulling out a small velvet box from Harry Winston. He flicked it open. Inside rested a mesmerizing 10-carat, flawless pink diamond ring. "They thought my weakness was putting a maid on a pedestal," Lorenzo whispered, sliding the massive diamond onto her thick, trembling finger. "They didn't realize I was elevating a warrior. Marry me, Clara. Be my wife. Be the Don of this family with me. Rule this city by my side." Clara looked at the ring, then into the fierce, devoted eyes of the man who worshipped her exactly as she was. The bruises on her shoulder would heal. The blood on the floor would be cleaned. But the empire they were about to build together would last forever. "Yes," Clara whispered, pulling him in for a kiss that sealed their bloody, beautiful fate. "Yes, Lorenzo." What an absolutely explosive finale. From a humiliated, plus-size maid to the fearless queen of the New York underworld, Clara proved that real power and beauty come in all shapes and sizes. Lorenzo didn't just protect her, he worshipped her exactly as she was, and in return, she used her incredible strength to save his life. Did you expect Clara to physically take down a trained Mafia assassin? Drop a comment below with your favorite jaw-dropping moment from this story. If you want more insane, real-life Mafia romance dramas, smash that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.